Andy Muschietti presents a really loud movie. Good God. Oh,
that's one of my major gripes about those.
How about the fact that this is not one, not two, not three, but 10 hours of content being served up to you by Stephen King and a various group of people. I don't, why is, before we start this episode, why is it the thing that everybody keeps coming back to? Why is it like the Stephen King story? I don't get it.
I'm not sure. So this came out when I was knee deep in Stephen King. Probably started reading him in 7th grade, possibly earlier, but I know for sure by 7th grade, I was reading Stephen. That's when I was watching the movies.
Sure.
So then it's like, oh, I can get the books. I know I checked some out from the library and then started buying them. And then when Pet Sematary came out, that was the first hardcover I bought. Like I knew it was coming out and I'm like, oh, I'm going to get the hardcover. And I bought hardcovers up through Skeleton Crew and
Great
Tommy
book,
Knockers. And then that's when I started going, no. And this was the first one where I was like, this ending sucks.
But hey, hold on. If we make a joke about it in the movie, it like absolves us of the fact that we fucking suck at ending long form narratives. That has been my complaint with Stephen King for as long as I've read Stephen King. Yeah. It's always Skeleton Crew. His short story collections are absolutely some of the finest horror short stories being written. His long form books oscillate between truly great, like The Dark Tower and The Stand, to ponderous like It. I mean, it is a 40-hour audiobook. What the fuck do you have to say? Look, for a comparison, the book about Watergate is 40 hours long.
Right.
What necessitated you to think a fucking 40-hour book is needed for a story about ostensibly 6 kids fighting a clown?
Yeah. And I remember being excited when the books were longer because it's like, oh, there's more to read.
Right.
And I remember the first time reading that, I was like, oh, I don't know that I'll ever read this again. And then when Tommy Knockers came out, I specifically thought to myself, I remember doing this. If this ends like it did, I'm done. And it did. And I pretty much was.
I never read or saw Tommy Knockers. They fight a giant spider at the end of that?
It's just about as bad as that. And the miniseries is just about as bad as the original It miniseries. Ladies, but I reread it knowing that the new one was coming out and it had been so long. So I went and I think I had given all my hardcovers to my brother-in-law at some point. So I went and got it back, read it, and really enjoyed it a lot more this time. It's insane how much backstory is given to even the most minor of characters. You mentioned yesterday when we were talking that opening with the gay couple, like you find out everything about those guys.
Yeah.
There's like, 10 pages.
Yeah.
Just about them or the one that gets killed at least.
King has never been a concise writer in long form. It's very Dickensian.
Yeah, that little girl, that gets killed at the baseball game. You're gonna learn her whole backstory, and then you get all the backstory of the town that's just hinted at in the films. And I enjoyed it a lot more. I enjoyed that level of detail and depth much more as an adult. But it's still, overlong, bloated, and the ending is ridiculous.
It's still a book about 6 kids fighting a clown.
Yeah,
which doesn't need to be 4,000 pages.
It would be a lot worse if he wasn't such a damn good writer. I mean, it at least it flows very easily, and I mean, I think I read it. I don't even know. It didn't take very long to get through it. I just kind of gobbled it up this time.
Yeah. And
then was able to compare that when I saw the movie, or at least the first one, because then the second one didn't come out for another however long. But, and since we're talking about them, I did watch the miniseries, it came out in 1990. I think I was already back from London. So I was 21 then, still not totally dismissed Stephen King, but wasn't religious about reading everything like I was. And I figured, I'll tape it. Pretty sure I taped it, watched the first half right away and thought, this ain't so great. And I don't think I watched the second half for a while. It took me a while to get to it because it just didn't compel me to finish it. So starting with that one, I mean, when did you first see it? Because you weren't
haven't even mentioned what this show is. Ladies and gentlemen,
do your intro.
On the Culture Cast, on this episode, we're talking about something that I have talked about before. Mark has talked about before. Mark Begley of the Wake Up Heavy podcast. Frequent guest. I'm a frequent guest on his show. He's a frequent guest on my show. We're talking horror movies, but we're talking 2 horror movies and a miniseries. If you don't know what it is, if you don't know what it is by now, it is it. It being Chris. It being Pennywise. No, we're going to be talking about the original miniseries, It, like Mark mentioned, from 1990, and then the subsequent films made in the more recent era of filmmaking, It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2, though it originally was just released as It, but don't let that fool you. It's a 2-parter, folks. So to answer your question, Mark, about the miniseries, when did I see it? I saw it drastically later in life than I would ever have to be to really enjoy it. I saw it 2014, maybe. Like that's how I've seen it as recently as in the last decade for the first time. I will tell you, though, growing up in the 90s and the 2000s, I knew plenty of people who told me that it was the scariest movie they'd ever seen.
Yeah.
Which is like, what the fuck? I don't know how you could find it scary because it's barely even good. It's not really even good. Frankly, for the most part, it's not good. The performances are atrocious almost across the board, aside from one, maybe two. The ending really fucking shits the bed more so than even the new movies do.
Oh, yeah.
And by the end of it, you have spent 3 hours with characters who are one-dimensional, beyond one-dimensional, and stay one-dimensional, even though you're given, again, probably 20 minutes with each character at least, like just them, their story. But that the miniseries lives and dies by one performance in my mind, Tim Curry's. And I know that you're not a fan. I
don't dislike it, but I don't find it scary at all. I see it as pretty hammy throughout.
Right.
He's
right. I mean, it's a funny, scary clown. In the new one, it's just a scary clown.
Right. And a lot of its issues have to do with it being a TV miniseries, not a cable miniseries. It wasn't on HBO. The stuff that we know these days, Netflix and all that, didn't exist.
It was on ABC.
And in prime time. So they're hamstrung by that for one thing. Most of the effects are pretty laughable for another thing. It's just
I love when Pennywise goes down the drain and becomes a puppet.
Cleo got a kick out of it.
It's like what?
I'm like, there's claymation in this. There are stop motion. There's, I give it a lot more slack now, I think, than I did in the past. And watching it with her, she really enjoyed it. And as I've said before in the past, that always helps me enjoy something a little bit more, to have a different perspective.
It's not good, but I have fun with it.
Yeah. It's not a, even though it is, 3+ hours, it's not a slog to get through. It is almost, and I kind of hate this term, but it's almost so bad it's good. And that's mainly the performances. But there's something there's something to enjoy, either to kind of chuckle at, why is it so mean? Or, we had a good time watching it. And I have watched it multiple times. I know I watched it prior to it coming out and It Chapter 2 coming out, and I'll get on Stephen King kicks and go like, well, I've watched everything else. I'll watch this one again. Why not? But I have also heard a lot of people say, oh, this scared the living crap out of me as a kid. And I get it, because I think about stuff that scared me when I was 10 or 12.
Right.
And I see it now, and I understand what scared me, but I'm looking at it going, this is not scary at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've seen the same thing where people that were born a good decade after me, this was sort of a pivotal horror moment. It was on TV, but it was still spooky or scary to them. And I can totally understand that. Like, the previous King series would have been Salem's Lot. And I don't know if I saw that on its original airing or not, but knew enough of, I may have, but I know that, there are some legitimately spooky things in that. The kid at the window is the one thing that most people point at, but there are a couple other, speaking of Tobe Hooper again, there are a couple of other scenes that are scary, but it suffers from the same thing. It's a TV miniseries with a much smaller budget, with a TV cast that can't quite pull it off. And you're dealing with, especially with it, you're dealing with narrowing down such a widely focused book into, and they do a pretty good job of that in the miniseries. Like,
it is almost 6 disparate narratives weaved together. Each of the kids has their own disparate narrative that is brought together through the framework of the Losers Club.
And all of that backstory that I was talking about earlier, all of that is gone. And that's fine. You can't have that. It would have been interesting if the original plan had happened where George Romero made this as a 5-night miniseries. That is one of those things that
I know
that pains me every time I read that. Like, oh, what it could have been,
and frankly, what it should have been,
what it still should have been.
Right. And that is that's the thing. Ultimately, with all of this, that's the problem, which is my big takeaway from the next 2 movies. But I think it's a problem writ large with this entire narrative. This is a narrative better suited for television, for a longer form. When they announced that they were doing the movie, like in theaters, I was flabbergasted. I was like, what are you thinking? Like, this is a story that needs to be told not slowly, but methodically. You need to build. This is a 2 or 3 season show, really. Like, at least 1 season for just the kids, and then another, like, it's 2 seasons. It's a limited series. It's one season for the adults, 1 season for the kids. I mean, that's how I would do it. That's how I would think intelligent screenwriters would do it. But again, they've put themselves in the same box. Again, in 90, they didn't put themselves in the box. That was the box that they constructed in the aughts. They have no fucking excuse as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
This was on TV because it had to be. At
the very least, a 10 episode, something, one and done series, to 8 to 10 episodes.
Do you remember Hannibal season 3? They split that story in half. They could do that here. 5 episodes of the kids, 5 episodes of the adults.
It's odd because that stuff was already happening when the first one came out. I remember when it got announced, and it was still up in the air as to what it was going to be. One long movie, split it in 2, and they never really figured that out, which is obvious when you see them now, that there was no set plan. It was just, this did really well, so now we can go ahead and do the second part.
Right.
Because it was still odd that the first recent It was just the kids, and then you think, the second one's going to be just the adults. But then they fiddle with that too. So it's
called Stranger Things Happened. That's what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a coincidence in my mind who they cast in It. They took one of, if not, I would say the kind of the biggest breakout star from Stranger Things, and they put him in It. And that immediately elevated it to like something that teenage kids are going to want to go see, because now the kid from Stranger Things is in it. And now adults have seen Stranger Things and they've already seen it. Like, I don't know. I want so badly to live in a universe where books are treated adaptation wise with the respect that they deserve, because authors are sitting and crafting these narratives and you are just hacking them to bits. And to put them on screen in a movie, for the most part, most screenwriters are not adept enough to take literature, novels, and turn it into something coherent. How do we know that? Because we see more often than not, book adaptations movie adaptations of books are woefully underserving the book's narrative, to the point where it's like, well, what was left out? Was what was left out important or not? And with It, when you've got 4,000 pages, like you said, things are bound to get left out. But I would think at some point you'd look at the threshold for the source material and go, would this be better served in longer form? I mean, right. Peter Jackson now might do Lord of the Rings as a TV show, right? I mean, it's that kind of thing where it's like, why wouldn't you? It gives you, as the creator, more time to breathe. Maybe the studio's not giving it to you. Maybe that's what it is. But these are established intellectual properties. Stephen King's It is like, it's got Stephen King's name on it. He's the most adapted author of all time. You're telling me that Amazon or Netflix wouldn't have been like, yeah, or HBO even like, hey,
right.
It, the TV show. I think if they had made it now, it would be a TV show. It would. I almost guarantee it. Like,
well, now we're getting the Derry stories or whatever, so they're kind of doing it ass backwards and going back to that. And
who asked for that?
It's interesting. I'm hoping that they stick, because, like I've said, there are tons of backstories to dive into just in the book. They don't even have to create new ones, which I'm sure they will, but there's a ton of stuff that is not even mentioned in any of the adaptations that over the years show this progression of Pennywise every 27 years, because he's been here for millennia.
Right.
And so you can hopefully they take some from the book and then create some new ones as well. But
it could be interesting.
I mean, I'll probably check it out.
Honest to God, with It, like I was so sick and fucking tired of it when it came out, because it was just like the second one was overhyped. Like after the first one came out and it was so good, everybody was super excited for the second one, and the second one just falls flat hard on its face.
It's like, funny. Well, no, I was gonna say
go for it.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
I think if we're talking about a coherent narrative being told from start to finish, as bad as the original is, which it's not great, again, but it's fun. And like you said, and I would agree. I would go as far as to say it's good in a so bad it's good way. I would agree. Like, the Annette O'Toole, why is it so mean? Pretty much everything with John Ritter, everything with Harry Dean Anderson for sure is just insufferable, but you got to laugh at it. And especially now with Annette O'Toole essentially refusing to talk about it, it's like, you knew what you were doing was bad, is what you're saying. Like, you have internalized your performance, and what they were asking you to do wasn't great. And it's not. It's most of the actors, like you said, can't get up over the hill of like, this is a television movie, and you're being asked to do probably a little bit more than you'd be asked to do elsewhere. And I don't think that anybody is able to get there. Nobody really gets there. Tim Curry as Pennywise is the best part of the original series.
And Tim Reed is probably the most even throughout.
Yeah. Yes.
The Mike 100%. Character.
But I would go as far as to say that that's the case in the sequels as well. At least the adult version of Mike is that's the thing, it's hard to talk about one without talking about the other now.
Yeah, right.
Because I can't help but watch the original and go, okay, well, now that we live in a post-It, new It world, I'm going to always be looking at the way they did it. And again, differently, better is subjective. If you're going to get the narrative either way, right? I think we would both agree the original movie, the two subsequent, sequels or, movies, chapter 1 and chapter 2, the narrative is the same. Ultimately, the bones of the narrative are the same. For me, I would still rather watch the original because I do like Tim Curry because I find him being funny and scarier than just I play games or whatever Bill Skarsgård does with his eyes. That's not scary to me. A guy crossing his, but it's not. I like it, but it's not scary. It's more.
I really like his performance. I that's one thing that I probably said on the whatever Stephen King thing I did. That contrary to, most people, I prefer his performance, just his delivery. I like the voice that he's doing. I do like the crazy eye thing because it's real and not CGI, and the slobber that just sort of happened because of the teeth that he's wearing. And I like the look of him better too. So I give.
But he's a Hot Topic clown. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the Joker it's like Jared Leto's Joker. Like it's a scary clown that like no kid is gonna find Tim Curry scary. Like
until his eyes go yellow and his teeth come out.
And he does that thing. Yeah, when he does that, then we're all on board. He's scary as fuck. But no teenager, because ultimately It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 were made for teenagers. It's a teenage horror movie in a lot of ways. I mean, just watch, especially the second one, and when we get to it, we'll talk about the thing that you hate the most and the thing that I make fun of all the time. The first one is not scary anymore, I don't think. I think it's an interesting look at TV movies in the 90s, but it's not scary. It's Tim Curry's performance is an interesting performance, but it's not a scary performance. He's doing something that's in between.
Yeah, it doesn't elicit chills and for one thing, he's not in it very much. For a 3+ hour, when you watch it all at once now, it's 3 hours and something. He's in the movie. He's in it for like 12 minutes. He has like 12 minutes of screen time. So
but he makes the most with it.
Right. And the one thing, and I mentioned this to you the other day that I always forget is that I always think that, okay, first night of the miniseries is all kids, second night is the adults. But like I realize every time I watch it, oh no, we do the flashback thing. It's more interwoven. It's just the second night is their adventure to kill it. But it's more structured more like the book actually was, where we hop back and forth.
The book is constantly cutting back and forth.
Yeah. I mean, in every chapter, it'll say the date, so it was either 1950 something or 1980 something. In the book's case, like 85 and 55, I think. And it was updated to 89, to 59 and 89 for the miniseries. And I forget that because I always think, the second part is always less interesting because it's just all adults. But it's not really that. It's more of the adults. But even then, we still have flashbacks. And even with the original, I still prefer the kids, even though, again, they're not performing at a high level. I mean, even little Seth Green isn't really that great. I
always forget.
Yeah.
I think Jonathan Brandis is probably the best of the child actors.
He's good. And the girl that ended up in Ginger Snaps and a couple other horror movies, I forget her name.
Oh, Emily Perkins.
Yeah, she's pretty good.
She is honestly, I think the kids are pretty good. I would say the kids in the original, I'm not going to say they're better than the new one. They're different. It's a different kind of kid because they're kids in the 50s. Not kids in the 80s.
Right.
I don't know. Those performances work for me because they're going for a specific kind of performance. It hews closer to the original book in a lot of ways because these are kids. These are kids that are the kids from the book. In the new movie, it's
80s kids.
They're Goonies kids who say shit and fuck. Like,
Yeah.
But yeah, Emily Perkins and Seth Green and Jonathan Brandis are standouts in the original cast for sure.
They are definitely better than the adult actors in this. Oh. I mean, there's just no question about it. And like you already mentioned, even John Ritter, who I love in most stuff, I really feel like, and I may have read this, I don't think they had a lot of time to prepare for this. I think it was a pretty rushed shoot. And that's very evident because the dialogue is so ham-fisted, it's not even funny.
Well, the why is it so mean thing comes to mind, right?
I mean, I use that little blurb often in my show. People that listen to Wake Up Heavy have heard me use that just as recently as probably the last episode when Cleo and I watched this. So I will say, because I asked her last night, I said, what's your kind of ranking of the its? And she likes the miniseries and then the first of the new ones and then the second one last. And I was like, okay. I said, I think you and Chris might agree on that.
Your daughter's a smart woman, my friend. You're raising a smart one. They're telling the same story. That's my problem. You can't even, not you, but I'm saying the you of the directors, by the end of the second I didn't feel like you justified the existence of this movie. I can go watch the original with its terrible climax, with a giant shitty stop motion. I mean, the stop motion spider looks good, but that's not the problem. The problem is it feels clunky at the end.
Yeah, it's not shot well.
No, it's in a very poorly lit, very clearly set bound location that looks it, feels it, and by the end of it, you're like, can this just be over? Can you just kill him and leave?
I find it interesting that they went with the book for that instead of changing it like they do in the new stuff. Right. And like, you're not beholden to making this thing look like a spider. It could have been anything, something that you could actually manage with the special effects technology that you had back then, which was, make him more monstrous.
We're a couple years removed from Jurassic Park.
Yeah, make him more monstrous. Just have it be a person in a suit. Fine with that.
That's what they were trying to avoid. And in trying to avoid that, they made it just look like a giant prop instead. That they're like, ooh, moving it like
like Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Yeah, I mean those scenes with Dennis
the octopus.
That scene with Dennis Christopher where he's as Eddie Kaspbrak where he's fighting it is ridiculous. It looks so hokey. It looks hokey and fakey. But again, for me, it is the superior it still because it's only it is only 30 minutes, 40 minutes longer than the second movie.
Right.
The second movie is almost 3 hours. Like what? It just, why? Like at some point you've got to ask yourself, is this the medium that I should be telling this narrative through? And I think when you get to that point, you've got to say, maybe this is a better suited as a miniseries. And like you said, now they're making one anyways. So what did you really achieve here? You made a movie to make a mini series?
And that's the problem that we've touched on already. And I believe I touch on in my episode about this, not really an episode about it, but when I was talking about Stephen King adaptations, is that not having that plan, because of course the studio isn't going to make a plan like that without knowing how much money they're going to make. Without having that set plan of, yes, this is the first half. We're going to release it now. We're going to film both or whatever and release the second half a year later, do the Lord of the Rings thing, do the Kill Bill thing, whatever. It's too long. We're not going to release a 4.5, 5 hour movie. Let's do this. It's like, no, we got to see how the first one does. There may not have even been a second one, which is okay with how they left it. I mean, most people, if you haven't read the book, if you have no idea what the story is about, would be like, okay, they killed him. And it's sort of open for a sequel at the end. If it comes back, you promise to come back to Derry and blah, blah, blah. It didn't have to continue, but the first one did obviously do well. So let's then completely reset this. And that's where all the trouble starts. because it's now we got to start filming it. It's already a year after we filmed this one. These kids, I mean, like I said the other day, watching the first season of Stranger Things and the second season and knowing how that had already been filmed and going, Finn Wolfhard doesn't look anything like he does anymore in the first It. What the hell? And I just kind of assumed, well, they'll just sort of fudge it and they're going to look older, but it's the same time period. Or maybe they'll fudge it and say, it's a year later or something in the movie. They didn't have to keep it at the same time, but that then creates all these problems for them. And the CGI, the face, the pitching, the playing with the pitch of their voices.
The aging 14-year-olds never felt so good. Fucking bizarre, frankly.
And it's weird because that there are certain scenes where they look okay. So this is stuff that they shot for that first one that they didn't use and were able to use in this one. And that's fine. But it's just like, why didn't you just spend the time then? I know you couldn't, but it would have made so much more sense to film all that stuff with the kids while you had them at the same age. And then, if you need some new stuff, do it. But to basically film probably a good 80% of the kid stuff much later than when the original was filmed just didn't help things at all.
Well, and that's why I come back to the original and say, like, the original, for all of its problems, at least it's a singular narrative throughout, where there's not these weird, like, don't look behind the curtain, like, don't look back there, where we're trying to trick you into believing that these characters are a certain way when they're not anymore. Like, we'll just retcon shit in our own movie, which we'll get to it. We get to it.
Yeah,
I think for me, the original miniseries, when you talk about it up against the new sequels, the thing that it stands out for me overall is it's not great. The actors aren't having a fun time. They have essentially said as much in recent times. They don't even talk about it, frankly. So that should give you all the information you need. Tommy Lee Wallace probably wasn't the right person to work on this. I think, like you said, George Romero would have been better suited for this, but Tommy Lee Wallace made my favorite Halloween movie. So it's not like he's not good at what he does. And he's an also really nice guy. So again, I'm not going to slander or throw shade at Tommy Lee Wallace because Halloween 3 is the best Halloween movie. If you don't like that, tough shit. I mean, I've never been a Michael Myers guy. I always found the idea of blowing up children's heads with Halloween masks a lot more nefarious than one dude with a knife walking around stabbing people.
And anybody that knows me or listens to my show knows that I'm in agreement with you on this. It's the only one I've done an episode on. So.
And it's the one for the longest time. Everybody was like, that movie's a piece of shit. It's not a Michael Myers movie. And now it's like, no, you don't understand. That is the Halloween movie.
Right.
Not only is it a Halloween movie, it actually is about Halloween too, which is also kind of fun.
And it's the one, like I've said many, many times, it's the one that I rented the most because it was the most out there.
It's wild. Robots, exploding children's heads, Tom Atkins just being Tom Atkins.
Yeah, man.
Tommy Lee Wallace is a fantastic horror director. I just don't think this was it. And again, I think that ABC clearly had their fingers in the don't go overboard pie, as in don't overdo it with the blood and the gore and the adult content, whatever you want to call it. I mean, this is 1990. This is 1990. This isn't Hannibal on NBC, like we talked about. You know what I mean? Like if they showed this now on over the air TV or whatever you want to call it, if they showed it now, I think you'd be able to get away with obviously a lot more. But it does feel kind of like baby's first retelling of it. It feels like those episodes of The Sopranos and Dexter that they were showing on like A&E, where instead of saying fuck, they say friggin', and they cut out all of the blood, gore, and violence. It's like, well, you're just taking away the heart and soul of the story.
Yeah. And that's the major problem for me, is that it was a made for TV miniseries. Right. When I think about it, and I probably make this comparison or have made it in the past, is that the miniseries is much more faithful to the book, which sometimes can be its fault, like the ending. Obviously, a lot more was left out, but you get the basic story of it. The kids dealing with it in the 50s, their losers club, the clubhouse, the barons, actually exists in the miniseries.
Bill Denborough's wife actually exists in the miniseries, which is a big part of the book.
And it's still weird to me that they even included that in the miniseries because it kind of goes. I mean, it plays out.
They had Olivia Hussey. Wouldn't you include it? She's like the other prestige casting that I always forget about. But she's why is she here? Who the fuck?
It doesn't amount to much. It doesn't. It's a much more complex and convoluted and blown out in the book, obviously, and takes a lot of time in the book. But I'm kind of glad it's not in the new ones. But when I compare them, then that brings up all the changes that were made. And I remember after watching the first one going, where the fuck are the Barons? That's like that's their safe haven.
Right.
Not even mentioned in the first one. And that's where, when I saw the second one, I was like, oh, all this familiar stuff is back now. So when I left that, and when I talked about it on my show, I was like, I think this is the one that I'm going to watch because it negates the existence of the first one. You don't really need it because we still have the kids in this one and we do the flashback thing. And even though, and they all have their own individual scares like they do in the first one. So it was like this immediate retconning of the first one.
Yeah.
Which now I see as a problem, as opposed to when I watched it going, oh, I'm happy to see the Barons. I'm happy to see this, which they avoided in the first one. I'm happy to see all these things. But then it's like, well, then the first one's pointless now.
You want to talk about that pointless first movie?
Yeah.
So it's directed by Andy Muschietti, but it was almost directed by Cary Fukunaga, which for me, you were talking about the thing with Romero and the original that for me is the big one here. Cary Fukunaga, if he had worked on it would have been scary. It would have been really something to get excited about. Instead, I'm just going to come out and say it because it is the thing that I make fun of this movie the most for. It's in the trailer. It's not in the movie. You pointed that out to me yesterday. But so what? Like it doesn't have to be in the trailer because what they do in the movie is even more egregious, where it's just loud, slamming music, not even music, just sound cues to scare you. Using sound to scare you is fine if it's done tactfully. When it's just a loud noise and a clown screaming at the screen, like pretty much all the scares in at least the first one, not so much the second one, but the second one has its own bucket of problems. In the first one, it's just like, shut the fuck up with the clown screaming constantly.
Yeah.
It's way too much.
That was my major issue with that. Both of them is a lot of the scares start out really well. They're slow, creepy. The, Ben in the library and seeing an egg and then going, they all start out slow, eerie, and creepy. And then it's just loud, fast, and obnoxious. Every scare ends that way in the movie. Every one of their scares ends that way. You're not being hyperbolic, literally. Yeah. The leper and the thing in the library. Like it's all the same shit. Like it's just what scares that kid, make it loud and chase after him. Right. Loud and go shaky and run towards the camera. Who's scared by that? I guess is my question. Well, I think that's not trusting an audience to feel like dread or terror. It's assuming your audience is children is what it feels like. If you see somebody, I think about this when I take the dog out for her last potty break at night. Like if I saw somebody down the street and in shadow and I noticed them start to walk toward me, like that would freak me the hell out. But if I like turned around and somebody just went, it would startle me. But momentarily, but it wouldn't. I mean, obviously, maybe that's a bad example. It would scare me, but it would startle you momentarily. It's not like a sense of foreboding and dread. Right. It wouldn't make me feel like, it wouldn't make me think, what is this guy doing? Why is he walking toward me? I can't see his face. All that stuff. That's what I'm thinking when these scares start out. Ooh, what's that going to turn into? What's this? The only one that I think is effective, I really like the opening with Georgie. I think it's done very well. That whole back and forth with him and Pennywise and the storm drain
feels like a proof of concept, doesn't it?
It works for me.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then everything else is just loud, obnoxious, and fast.
Even that scene has it though. Towards the end,
right at the very, very end. But even that, I remember thinking that when he kind of unhinged his jaw and stuff, I was like, "Ooh, that's pretty cool." But yeah, after that, it's just like, I'm going to run towards you. There's going to be a loud noise on the soundtrack, and that's what scares people. And
allegedly.
And I think most people get fooled by that startling them, thinking that means scary.
Which is unfortunate because in my mind, what it really does is it further degrades the horror genre in a direction that I don't like. And that direction is, this is the expectation for big budget horror movies, is loud noises, screaming, and, jiggling of the camera.
Yeah.
And it was so fucking successful that it did change the way big budget horror movies are made. And it kind of paved a way for bigger budget horror movies to exist. But at the same time, it didn't really, because what have we seen in the last 5 years since the first one came out that has really been influenced by it?
I don't know.
Right? Like,
but the loud, fast stuff is very common in anything, like the Blumhouse movies or something.
Yep.
Something like It Follows is more along what I'm thinking of, like
right.
some person just ambling towards you.
Right.
And I can understand that doesn't work for some people, but it works for me more on a, this is more realistic. This is what I would probably encounter in real life. Somebody ambling towards me, or
right.
just catching a shadow when you get up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night or something like that. Not, somebody pounding on your door or screaming their head off.
I know their intentions. I know your intentions if you're jumping out and screaming at me.
Right.
Well, I mean, I think that kind of cuts to what this entire conversation about the way of using Pennywise is about. Either he's a loud, scary clown, which is what he is in the new movies, or he's quiet and creepy and menacing, which they do, like you mentioned, they do it a couple times, but it's almost like a disjointed scene where he's that for 3/4 of it. And then at the end, it's like, nah, it's like, that's not scary. But Bill Skarsgård is good. I'll give you that. I will give you that 100%. I'm not a huge fan of it because for me, what it strikes me as is he and or the movie is trying too hard. You're trying too hard to be scary. You're doing the dancing and the eyes and the drooling. Like, you don't have to do all of that to be scary. You don't like that. All that other stuff is just window dressing. What I assumed the character was going to be was something really scary and delighted in playing with the children, as in like taunting them. And, he feeds off of their fear. That's what he eats. He eats them because he makes them feared. And then that seasons the meat. And then he eats the seasoned fear seasoned meat. Why does he not just kill all the kids at any point in this movie? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've never understood that in any of these movies. It's like, just kill him. Yeah, just kill him, clown.
He kills Georgie right away.
Right.
And obviously some of the other kids that have gone missing in the town.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always been kind of...
not trying to be Mr. Cinema Sins, but...
They're obviously scared in each of their individual scenes in all adaptations. And I guess you can say not scared enough.
I'm not going to do the movie's job for it or the book's job for it, because they don't say that.
It feels like the 007 thing, the villain, like,
you took the words right out of my mouth.
I'm going to let you sit and think about this while you're sitting on the table with the circular saw going towards your crotch.
Let me tell you my plan. Yeah. Where it's like, just shoot him. Speaking of Seth Green, like in Austin Powers, Dad, just shoot him. He's right there. Just put a gun to his head and shoot him. Like, Pennywise, why don't you just kill him? Like,
he has them all on their own. On
the ropes multiple too, times. In every single one of the scenarios. Yeah, even as adults, he could kill them, and he doesn't.
I think that's what people like to refer to as a plot hole, and I
plot convenience.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with that.
And I don't want to be that guy, but that is the one thing when I think about this that really bothers me is it doesn't make any sense because the clown in the new movies is brutal. He eats kids. He rips their arms off. And,
I mean, we see it in the movie. We see it in the movies.
Yeah.
We see it with Georgie. We see it with Hochstetter in the tunnel. We see it in chapter 2 with the girl at the baseball game, the kid in the fun house, or
they ramped that shit up in the second one hard.
And I like that scene of the little girl under the bleachers. It's works. That's a scene that works for me. Even with his head, flying open like a snake, unhinging his jaw and biting her head off, which they don't show, but that plays out well. And I like it when, speaking of Pennywise, what I like about his performance, and he does this, I think, with her and with Georgie, is there's a moment of like where he kind of just goes blank.
Yeah, he stops
and loses his smile and stuff. And that to me is like, that's the creepy part,
right?
Of him.
You don't know what he's thinking. I mean, you know what he's thinking, but you don't. You can see that. You can see the smoke coming out of his ears. The gears are turning.
Right. And it's like switching gears from that jovial characterization to now my jaws are going to unhinge and I'm going to eat your face off,
right,
or chop your arm off.
So speaking of the children, did you like the kids in the new movie?
Yeah, I like all of them. I'm trying to think. I really liked Jack Grazer as Eddie in the first one. He gets changed in the second one, and I didn't like that change.
He becomes Finn Wolfhard's character randomly.
He becomes the second Richie. Yeah. And I'm like, what? I mentioned that to my daughter. I'm like, why do we have two Richies now? He's not like this. He's the hypochondriac who has a lot of funny lines. He's not the asshole smart aleck. That's Richie's job. And they do this in other instances where they strip Mike of his whole story
almost entirely
in the first chapter. And I'm like, why are they giving this to Ben? And again, they had to kind of retcon it in the second one and give it back to Mike. Mike is the one that does all the history studying, or the studying about the history of Derry in the book, in the original miniseries, and basically in the second one, because they have to give it back to him or Ben has to stay and be the librarian.
Which makes no sense because that's completely changing the narrative.
It would have made sense in reference to the first chapter, though, because that's what Ben does. He's the librarian. Well, hold on. He's the architect that builds the barons. Whoops.
Why not change the narrative? I've never that's the other thing I don't understand. Why not make your own? Like, you've got the framework, but do your own thing. Like,
yeah.
Are people going to be, the question I have is, I guess, if we can assume that you leave 50% out, right? Let's just say 50%. I'm not saying that, but let's say you have a narrative, a novel that you're adapting. You leave 50% of it out. Are you telling me you're just going to leave 50% out, not do anything with it? Are you not going to do your own thing? Like, I appreciate that we can adapt things, but I don't think we need to be 100% beholden to them entirely.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I think that would have been a change that they should have made. Sure.
They
switch it up. Why not? Who cares? Who really cares? Stephen King, he already doesn't like adaptations anyways. Like,
they might as well have swapped it and had Ben continue in that role in the second one.
I'm going to piss off all the It fans doing that.
It was really weird to me, though, that, and I may just be making something out of nothing here, but it was strange to me that they took the black character's story and gave it to the white kid.
It is strange.
I'm like, does anybody else notice this, or is this just me being too whatever?
#woke.
I'm like, that's odd. Why can't he be? And they mess with they do change, like his backstory is totally different. Mike's backstory is different. They do a little bit of that in the original with Eddie, having him be a virgin.
Right.
In the book and in these, he basically marries his mom. And I like that they have
literally the same actress.
Yeah,
right?
Same actress in the second one. But I always thought that was kind of weird. And then they change in the new ones. They change Richie, and I which I'm fine with. It's just like, but you didn't set that up in the first one. And again,
I'm not
now
okay
you're
with it because it's gay baiting. It's 100% gay baiting. They don't even fucking say it. They don't even say I'm gay.
Yeah, it's a weird.
Fuck you, movie. How's that? No, seriously, how's that? If he's gay, just fucking say he's gay. It's 2017, asshole.
And this is the kind of change like you're talking about. Like, make that change from the beginning.
Yeah,
and instead of retconning it, and then you can have a flashback with CGI Finn Wolfhard and
with his giant head arcade, and weird glasses
in the arcade, and I was like, oh boy, that's not.
He's gay because they touched hands. Yeah. That's how us gays communicate, is by hand touching. I mean, that's the thing. As someone who's gay, you're trying to represent my community in a movie, and you fucking failed. And you did it in a way that I would have expected them to do it in the 90s, because that's the way they did it in the 90s with Eddie's character in the 90s, because he's gay. He's coded as gay in that.
Right.
And like, so now it's just, oh, I know your secret. Like, who actually cares? The only one who cares is Pennywise.
Yeah.
This movie is taking place in 2017.
Right.
I would guarantee like 60-70% of the country at that time, because the number's only gone up since, consider themselves either allies of the LGBTQIA plus community, or they don't, or it's not something that they're actively going about shitting on. But yet this movie goes, well, we can't say gay. But that's my perspective.
Right. It didn't bother me like you can see it bothering people when they make changes in Marvel properties or DC properties with skin color or sex or gender identification or something. Like, Richie isn't gay in the books, that kind of stuff. Like, I fucking don't care. Make him not a comedian. Make Ben not an architect. It doesn't mean anything in the grand scope of the story.
Literally, it means so little they didn't even include the reason Ben was an architect in the first part of the movie. In the first chapter, they didn't even mention, like you said, they set him up like Mike Hanlon.
Exactly. And then they have to fix it. And I'm like, well, why fucking fix it? You've already laid this foundation. Have Ben stay back, be the librarian, and have Mike be the architect. If you're going to swap their stories, swap them all the way.
But could he have gotten hot if he had been the librarian?
Huh?
Could he have gotten hot if he had been the librarian?
Probably not.
Well, see, and again, that's the other.
We know librarians is all ugly,
right? Except for the actor who plays Mike in the second movie, who is my favorite part of that second movie. Frankly,
I don't recognize him from anything
other than the Old Spice commercial.
Oh, that's him. Oh my God,
Isaiah Mustafa, dude. He has not been in a whole lot, but he is the old face of Old Spice.
Yes.
Doesn't that blow your mind?
That's so funny. Right when you said that, I'm like, oh my God, I do recognize him. I like him. I like the adults in this for the most part. I, again, don't think they're as strong as the kids. You asked me about the kids. I like the kid that plays Bill. I really like Jack Grazer in the first one as Eddie. Definitely my favorite. Finn Wolfhard's fine. Sophia Lillis
thing.
Yeah, Sophia Lillis I really like a lot in just about everything that I've seen her in. She's one of those like what's that girl's name that's in the first Annabelle movie and in Ouija.
Oh, Lulu.
She has a genuineness to her acting that I really enjoy.
I agree.
And they were both in Sharper Objects. So I like the kid actors a lot.
Good actors.
Probably right. And this is the thing, comparing them to the original, these kids have all really honed their skills already prior to this. And I think that's just a generational thing as well, where you're not taking kids that have been playing in sitcoms and throwing them in this TV miniseries. You've got kids who are, working in film.
Right.
And TV as well, but stuff like Netflix TV and HBO TV and working with, directors that are getting something out of them. But compared to the adults who are fine for the most part, I don't think James McAvoy can do an American accent. Anytime I've seen, I'm like, Cleo, what's this? What's he? Kid, get over there.
To say he's miscast might be an understatement. He is not just miscast, he's poorly cast. I appreciate and I get what they were going for. They wanted a serious actor with an A to be in this movie. Jessica Chastain and James McAvoy are actors with a capital A. They're in dramatic, serious movies. They are brought in to elevate the two kind of serious characters in the piece, Bev and Bill, because they have a romance that goes nowhere for whatever reason. Don't know why even fuck with it anymore. It's a waste of time. You know where it's going. You already know who the characters are that have sent the note. So it's like we're just figuring out along with the characters and it goes nowhere.
But she's already figured it out in the past.
Right.
That's the other thing that they retcon. She already figured it out that Ben was the one.
Yeah. But James McAvoy is awful in this movie. Genuinely, he drags the movie down anytime he's on screen because he is miscast.
He is my least favorite of the adult characters in this one. And
it blows my mind.
His wife is in it, but only at the beginning, thank God.
Right. But what's funny is
Peter Bogdanovich.
Right. Rest in peace. Yeah. But what's funny is I remember I'm sure you got caught up in it too. Like, who are they going to cast as the adults in the second?
Yeah.
movie?
Yeah.
They a lot of the sites that I was reading at the time, they called James McAvoy almost immediately.
Huh.
They were like the kind
and
of
Jessica Chastain.
Right. Those were the two that were like, these are the kind of our, bucket list casting would be Jessica Chastain as Bev. Yeah, makes sense. She's a redheaded actress. Okay, fine. And James McAvoy though.
Yeah.
He's a short, diminutive guy. I guess that's what I wish I could see what he brought to that audition as the character. Cause it doesn't come through on screen.
I mean, the kid isn't a short statured kid.
No. And he grows like 5 inches. But Bill Hader, the first time I watched it, when it first came out, the first 2 movies, when I first saw him initially, or at least the second one, I liked him a lot. This second time, good God. It's just a lot. It's just constant.
10 million times better than Harry Dean Anderson, though, and his awful improv.
Yeah,
but he improved all his jokes in that original, and they are just absolutely hideous.
Yeah, well, in comparison to Harry Dean Anderson, yeah,
R.I.P. again.
Yeah, Bill Hader looks like fucking Alec Guinness, obviously, but the entire movie is about Bill Denbrough, effectively. It opens with his character. Does it end with his character? No, but kind of. I mean, the story comes full circle in a way that he is ostensibly the lead. And James McAvoy, the second one has a lot of problems. The retconning is a big one. But the casting of James McAvoy as your second lead or your first lead, I guess,
Bill's definitely the lead. He's the lead of the book and the
right
original, and
because it's Georgie dying that starts all of this, so it has to be his story.
At least James McAvoy didn't have an awful ponytail.
I wish they had it.
Speaking of, I would have loved that they used that as their homage to the original miniseries. Hey James, you got to have a ponytail. What?
Well, at least he's still an author, but it allowed them to get some cracks at Stephen King in.
Yeah.
Which again, it feels like it's like, oh, you're going to hang a lantern on the fact that this movie's ending is going to suck.
And many of the books that came after this had endings that sucked.
Cell, The Dome. Shall we continue? We could run them.
Knockers.
We can run them down. That's the thing.
Needful Thing. Well, Needful Things is okay, but that's another one that was kind of like, do you know where your books are going to end before you start writing them? Because it sort of feels like you don't, brother.
It's called cocaine. It's a hell of a
deal. That had a lot to do with it.
I mean, that's whenever I make jokes about it or whenever anyone brings it up, I always go, that's the book that Stephen King created along with his best friend, Cocaine, because it's a 4,000-page book about a fucking clown. Like, what the hell, man? Like, at some point, the story's got to end, and it ending with a giant spider in the new movie is just as bad in the original, but actually, frankly, worse because it goes on for like 3 times as long. It's half of the movie. The movie's 2.5 hours long.
That's why I said to my daughter, I'm like, did we finish this when we watched it a couple months ago? Because I was struggling with remembering the finale, the extended finale of this one, and how we replay a lot of what happened in the first one. And that's when I started. I think I just tuned out the last time we watched it before watching it the other day.
Oh, you mean you didn't like
it becomes
the fucking
repetitive.
fetch quest in the middle of the movie?
It becomes that I don't mind so much. But again, that's repeating a lot of what happened in the first one. So
they do this thing where they're like, well, we all went apart at some point during the summer, which you saw, but then there was a secondary part to that. And it's like, fuck you.
Yeah.
That's so retconny, lazy. It's like the thing with the Barons where it's like, oh, remember this clubhouse we had? It's like, no, because you didn't go there in the first movie.
You didn't show it, or you didn't even mention it.
It's like they think the audience are dummies.
You ran through it to have the rock fight. That's the only instance of it. And it is very retconny. And that becomes much more apparent now, even though I'm glad to see that stuff in there. It's like, well, why wasn't this in the first movie? Right. You made these choices to leave stuff out for time or whatever to hit on these other things in the first one. And now you're playing catch up and you're changing things in the interim. You've backed yourself in a corner that you're having to get out of with Richie or with the swapping of Mike and Ben. And now you've got to kind of fix them. So I think I like I said, after I saw this and left the theater, I was like, now, I mean, this is like the complete story. You don't really need the first one, but I never bought the Blu-ray for the second one. I bought the Blu-ray for the first one right when it came out. And that kind of made me realize, I don't think I'm glad that stuff is in there, but I don't like how things were handled. And so I feel like almost like I have to watch it if I watch the first one. It's like, well, now I got to finish the story. And I'm sure
say the original doesn't need it. Like the original movie stands better as a movie if you don't watch the second one.
Yeah. Well, I think I kind of did that back then. I'll get to the second one eventually.
I will say the other thing about the second one that really, really, really irks me. And it's a bigger problem with almost the movie in its entirety is you have said to us essentially that the first movie doesn't matter, right? Because you're showing us stuff from the first movie that we never saw, which means you didn't present all the information in the first movie that we needed. Now you're doing it in a very ham-fisted way. You've extended your movie's runtime by essentially 45 minutes to do so, because otherwise your movie's only going to be an hour and a half. As if that's a problem. It's not a problem. You inject into your movie all of the mysticism shit from the first book, or from the original books, Ritual of Chud and the turtle and stuff. And yet for whatever reason, they spend almost 15 minutes in the opening of this movie with two homosexual characters getting beaten to death. And that really set I remember sitting in the theater, Mark, and thinking to myself, like, I'm already out after that first scene. And I will tell you why. They bring up something in the first movie that they never address in the second movie, but they kind of want to have it both ways. The whole thing of like Derry is infected by the clown. They kind of mention it in the first movie, and with Ben having the thing carved into him, and you see the car drive away with the balloon. And then the second movie, they do it right at the beginning, and that's it. And all it feels like at the beginning of that second movie is they just wanted to show a couple gay characters getting the shit beat out of them. Because I can't for the life of me. I know it's in the book, but we've already established you don't have to hold strong to the book. And I don't know what the fuck was the point of that scene in this movie? In this movie, what's the point of the scene? To show that it is back? Right. We know it's coming back. Yeah. Like it's a foregone conclusion. We're sitting in the theater watching the movie about it coming back. You don't need to show us this weird scene of gay characters being beaten to death. And like, it really turned my stomach, and not in a, I want to keep watching the movie way, in a, like, this is unnecessarily brutal. Please, I'm done. Maybe this is me being a big puss, but I'm sorry. It really, I really take offense at the beginning of this movie. It doesn't offend me. I just don't want to watch the movie anymore after seeing how unnecessarily cruel the movie is for no reason. It doesn't serve the narrative. It doesn't, at all.
There are, and we see, the girl in the bleachers, there are any number of ways they could have started Pennywise is back.
Right. Because he has to make his presence known somehow.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I can, it's a very fine line that I don't think it successfully toes. Is this exploitative to have it be this story from the book about the gay couple at the carnival? And yeah, I mean, it never bothered me. My thought was, wow, that's cruel and hideous, but this shit really happens. That's sort of this is how people really are, even without Pennywise having stained this land, kind of. That's how I saw it. Like, Derry's awful. People are awful in general. This shit really happens, but I can totally see. Yeah.
Why is the fucking clown movie doing this?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I can't answer that.
Oh, I know, but I'm just saying, we're just like, why? Like, I understood it when the book was set in the 80s. When it's set in the teens, like, I have a hard time even fathoming. Like, well, that town, like, do you know what? Actually, it speaks to the bigger problem. Derry in the second movie doesn't even feel like a real place. It feels like a city. I mean, there's a point where they're walking through abandoned streets, but yet we're supposed to believe there's a carnival and there are other people in the city. But most of the time, it's an abandoned town, it looks like, which they never talk about, which they never address, nothing. And it's like, this, you're trying to have it both ways. You're trying to tell me, well, Derry is this terrible place, seemingly because of Pennywise, because he's making people worse than they might be. But yet at the same time, there's like nobody in the town for the most part. Like, they walk into storefronts. It's like a video game. There's nobody on the street, but when you walk into the storefronts, there are the people. Like in the pharmacy, like in Stephen King's random fucking 5-minute cameo that serves nothing other than to, again, point out the you don't know how to write endings thing. And then they have the carnival, but like, I never get the sense that Derry is a real place in the second movie. First movie, obviously I do. Second movie, it's like, is this a real town, or is this just like where the characters had to go to fight the clown?
Yeah, I think, and maybe there's something that ended up on the cutting room floor, but if I remember correctly, yeah, it's like most people have left because it's such an awful place to live.
But they never
talk about it. I've never really even noticed that, but
that's a part of the book, and they're going to talk about it in the new series, which is why I point this out. You and I both know they're going to be like, Pennywise has infected the land or something to that effect. And it's like, but you never said that before. You never pointed that out. You never made a point of reinforcing that, because that is, in my opinion, an interesting avenue to mine. Wouldn't you think? Like, because Stephen King goes out of his way to mine it in the book. You know, the adults don't believe what's going on. The adults aren't listening to the kids. The town is, like you said, falling apart because Pennywise is like Fear Street. But, you know, Fear Street was good. Fear Street explained why those bad things were happening, and I understood it. In this, it's like, well, he just landed like a meteorite, which, man, I guess props to them for approaching the ritual of Chud stuff.
Yeah, still no turtle, though.
There's a turtle in the first movie.
There's turtles throughout on, you know, somebody's desk or as a Lego creation or whatever. But yeah, we don't get the cosmic turtle at the end to help.
Well, we get the ritual of Chud.
Kind of. Yeah, they play around with that stuff, which is fine. I
just goes nowhere. It's a total MacGuffin.
You have to change the end of it, or it's just going to look like the original miniseries.
And what's weird is it kind of still looks like the original miniseries. Well, it's them being chased around by a CGI clown as opposed to stop motion clown.
And it's still ineffectual the way, it's like the end of Nightmare on Elm Street when Nancy says, I take all your power away.
You're nothing.
Like, yeah,
you're shit. You're shit is what she says.
Yeah.
You're shit.
And it's the same thing here where you don't have any power over us and you're small and blah, blah, blah. And then he shrinks down to that little pancake thing. Did you know that
making them small, you don't have to physically make them small to make them small? Did you know that? Did they forget how they killed the clown in the first part? Because that's exactly what they did. That's the other thing I never understand about this narrative. We're being led to believe that they forgot everything, but they didn't, right? Because Mike didn't forget everything and they remember everything at the end. So they just magically fucking remembered how to kill the clown that they've already killed before by doing the exact same thing. Like, come on, man. Like this, it's just, I've never understood the second part of the story's existence because the second part of the story has never been executed well. because there's nothing there. You're telling the story from the first part all over again.
Right.
But not as good. It's not enough for them to just be adults. That's the problem with all of this. It's never just enough for them to be adults. That's not enough. I
think that's the problem with the story in general, is that
the story itself.
That's why in the miniseries, that's why in these movies, that's why in the book, the adult sections are the least interesting. Just have it kids on an adventure, and they like the first half of the new stuff, and they kill it. It would be fine.
Right. I mean,
kids in peril is inherently more interesting than adults in peril,
especially in the time and place that they're setting it. That first movie is less of a Stephen King It adaptation and more of an adaptation of The Goonies and E.T. with more horror dressing, with a true horror narrative on top of it. Because those characters in the original, in It Chapter 1, are not, like we've already mentioned, are not very close to the characters in the book. They're kind of their own thing, because again, this is being transposed into the 80s. These kids can't act the same. It wouldn't be believable. They wouldn't be scared of the same things. You know, they have, for whatever reason, at the end of the second movie, the new one, you know, Ben going, "You're just a mummy." It's like, that wasn't even in this fucking movie. Like that's in the original. That's the whole Universal Monsters thing. That was what Stephen King was trying to do with it, was shoehorn in the Universal Monsters, because they show up in the book as Frankenstein and the Wolfman and the Mummy. That's nowhere in the movie. But yet they go, "You're just a mummy." And it's like, that is not from this story. That's from the original It story. That's from the It TV series, but that's not from this. So why are you saying that? It's so bizarre. Like they don't know where they lie on the spectrum of the It story, because they're getting their own wires mixed. Did we say this? Didn't we say this? Did we show them this? Did we change it? It's like, do you even know? And
does he not see a mummy at some point in the first one? I know that Ben's scares are the headless kid and the eggs
and the librarian,
but in the house, maybe not. I don't remember it.
It's there in the original, because he sees the fucking wolf.
That's right. That may be what I'm thinking of. And yeah, he does. Yeah, I wonder if that's just supposed to be a callback.
Well, the fervent fans of It.
Well, and Ben is, I believe, the only returning actor from the original. The kid that played Ben is in that office, in the architecture office or whatever.
Well, because they're trying to convince you that he's the original, that he's Ben all grown up.
Right. That's true.
Because he would have been the more believable Ben grown up. That's the other thing, that the whole, like, he's not fat anymore, now he's hot. Like, oh my God, are we still doing that?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, what's weird is there are idiosyncrasies in the original It story that do not play now, that don't have any point or purpose being in the new narrative, and they kept him in there. Like he's skinny now, so he's hot. It's like, fuck you, movie. Like, good Lord. What the
One thing they don't keep, though, is preteen gangbang.
Hey,
let's not
baby.
leave this conversation without bringing up the preteen gangbang.
Almost to the end of the episode, and I thought we were going to make it to the end without mentioning it, but no gangbang, folks. So because it was needed to begin with.
The miniseries, I think she gives them all a hug, and in the new one, she gives them all a smooch or something like that. You know, I'm going to admit something here, and I may have done this on the little episode I did, but I remember that from reading it the first time and how weird it was. And does it need to be in the book? No. But I sort of felt like I understood what he was going for, in that the idea of them, the only thing, they were so close, but the only thing that was missing was the physical act of love. And it's just so weird to even to talk about that way. But that's sort of the point of that. Is it necessary? Obviously not. That's basically what they used to defeat him that first time as kids.
Love
is the preteen gangbang. Like, we love each other deeply, but the only thing that we haven't done is experience the physical act of love. And so
maybe just don't describe what children's cocks are like.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of where, like, I don't have a problem with the gangbang, just like don't go into detail.
Yeah. And so Beverly screwed all the boys and they went on their merry way.
I don't need to know about Ben Hanscom's big old wiener as a 12-year-old. Like it's not that again, there are things like that's the weird thing about it is the things that they don't include. I understand why they don't include them, but the things that they did include that shouldn't have been included. I don't know why they didn't choose to not include them.
Yeah. Some of the stuff is,
we have to be beholden to the source narrative. Like, no, you don't.
Yeah, no, you don't. I mean,
nobody said you have to. Maybe the studio did, but I don't think that the studio execs are sitting and reading these books ahead of time to know what this is before they greenlight the projects. Like, I know that's how they changed
the Mist. Think about how they changed the Mist, and I mean,
still the finest adaptation of any Stephen King anything, as far as I'm concerned.
A total 180. And I don't remember if I read that. That was in one of his collections, I believe. Yeah. Oh, I must have. I think it's the big story in Skeleton Crew, or I think so.
Skeleton. Yeah, I think so.
And when I saw the movie, I didn't remember how it ended, but when I watched the movie, I was like, oh shit, that's dark. That is so dark and depressing.
But I love that movie.
And then reading, that wasn't, because Stephen King does lean towards happy endings. He really does. And I sort of appreciate that as an older person, like, or a little bit of relief. Like it's not, Danny and Wendy make it out of the house just fine and blah, the end, not now Danny's a drunk and all that other stuff that Dr. Sleep brings up. But yeah, so you're not beholden to the stories. Change them in a specific way that works for something in this day and age, as opposed to you've already changed the time. So why not change the atmosphere?
That's what I know. It's like, it's weird. They've made choices to change things, and then they've made choices to not change things. And the things that they don't change, I can't fathom why they didn't change them or why they just didn't omit it, because they did omit the child gangbang.
Yeah.
Maybe they should have included it in the new movie. They should have. Frankly, I think they should have done something to that effect.
Fukunaga would have, actually.
I
heard some weird shit about his script. He had some weird shit going on in his script.
Again,
I can't remember specifics, but
there's a lot to mine with the It story that they don't mind because they have to be beholden to the scary clown narrative. There are things there to mine. They never have, because it's all about the scary clown. Because again, we talked more about how Bill Skarsgård's eyes are doing things and he's able to be scary. Than what is the story of It about? What is it really about? What was Stephen King trying to talk about with his story? What's it like to grow up as a kid? The problems and ins and outs of being a kid?
Trauma.
Because none of the movies take a stand. None of the second there's two other movies, chapter 1 and chapter 2. At the end of the second movie, they kind of try to like be true to yourself and be with your friends. It's like, this is such lazy shit. Like it's just so lazy, because like the movie has had nothing to say almost the entire time, and then they try to tack it on at the end. It's like, remember, you'll know what Stanley said. It's like,
right, which I think is a fabrication of the film. Speaking of,
yes, completely. Again, and that's the other thing, like the Stanley Uris character is completely underserved in the second part of the narrative because of the way they did the narrative. Again, it's like he's completely underserved as a character. And I mean, he's underserved in the book, but that's the intention, because he kills himself.
Right. Which makes sense in the case of the book. And he was always the one that dismissed everybody's stories about seeing it. And it, even for his own, he didn't want to believe it. And they do a pretty good job of that in the original miniseries, where, it's all, he's science and facts. Like none of this is true. You guys are all imagining this, so on and so forth, until he has his scares. But that makes me think also that, and with the flip-flopping of Mike and Ben, it's like, maybe cut out a kid or two. If we're not going to be beholden to the story, just maybe simplify things and not have 6 kids that you have to show scares for in the first one and again in the second one. And as adults, you love
the kids in the first one so much they have to be in the second one.
Well, I know they have to be in there, but I mean, start with 4 or 5 kids as opposed to 6 or whatever. Speaking of backing yourself into a corner. I think they also did this with the villain, and there's absolutely no way he were to survive that fall in the well.
Oh, right.
You've got to bring him back because you're making the second one. But that
waste of fucking time
is a waste in the original and in this too.
Right.
It's kind of like the kid in the funhouse. It goes nowhere. So Eddie gets stabbed in the face. He doesn't kill any of them.
No. You know we both know who that's drawing literary inspiration from, right? From fucking Renfro from Dracula. I mean, that's that character, right? He does the bidding of the villain,
right.
But is completely unhinged. But yet somehow Renfro in Dracula is actually a compelling character. Henry Bowers is just an asshole.
He sets forth plot points.
Right.
He makes things go forward. This is just, I'm in your bathroom. I stab you in the face. I get stabbed. I leave.
Maniacal laugh.
It's mishandled in the original miniseries. It should have just been left alone. He, and as a kid, drives the story forward in certain cases with Ben and with the rock fight and things like that. But I do like, though, that how they got a lot of those adult actors that looks so much like the kids. Him, for one example, and the girl, the daughter of the pharmacist, that woman. It's like, did you find their moms or their older siblings to play these people? Because it's uncanny how much they look like the younger actors.
Honestly, Jay Ryan, the actor who plays Ben, I think he looks the most like his younger self.
He really does,
which is shocking because they're not related at all.
No, it's a good match. I actually think that the Eddies too, they look a lot alike.
Yes. I like James Ranson a lot. He was in a season of Bosch that I recently watched, and he's a fun actor. He's a squirrely little actor, and I like that kind of that energy that he brings in Bosch. He brings it in It as well, where he's kind of a little squirrely, kind of a little bit of a weaselly looking guy, but that's what he needs. He plays Eddie perfectly. But then they show young Eddie in the new movie, and it's like, what fucking character is this? Because the Richie. Older version of him is still acting like the one from the first movie.
Yeah, that really does bother me that they turned him into Richie number 2 in that second one. I'm like, wow, I don't need another smart ass.
Well, and it goes nowhere. Like, it doesn't serve anything. We already have the joke machine in Finn Wolfhard.
Right.
Like,
so now we're doubling up on them because I guess it's part of that relationship that they have or something that they're trying to
shoehorn in the gay. In the gay. Like, remember that scene in the first movie where he goes and carves the initials? Wait, they didn't do that. In the first. That's the thing. Like, they're referencing things in the second movie that never happened.
Right. The flashbacks to are
cut him out of this fucking movie entirely.
Are different things than what we saw before, which is fine in a certain respect, as in, like I mentioned, the book and the original go back and forth throughout the whole thing. Here, it's like we're going to have the best of both worlds. Because
that first movie was such a success, cynically, they were like, put the kids in it again. You got to have the kids. It's like, no, we don't. We, you know what? The perfect shot would have been take all the kids stuff out other than the way the film opens, which I think is rather successful, where she's, Bev's levitating or whatever. And then just have the kids at the end of the movie where you see them looking in the reflection and seeing themselves. And that would have been a good earned moment. Instead, it's like, I have seen the kids. They look fucking weird. They sound fucking weird because they've been CGI'd. I mean, Finn Wolfhard looks like he has a beach ball for a head. I don't know how else to describe it, but whatever they did to Finn Wolfhard to de-age him makes him look odd, like a CGI character.
Yeah. And you can really notice it on a couple of them more than the others.
Yeah.
Ben, Eddie, and
Finn Wolfhard
and Richie all look odd.
They look very strange. And it's like, what? So it's like that thing in Justice League, Whedon's version of Justice League, where it's like, why okay. So you're going to do the whole CGI mouth thing and make the problem worse. Like, don't make the problem worse. Just go with it. Because you know what? If you do what they did, everybody's going to notice that you digitally de-aged 15-year-olds. Everybody's going to notice that their voices have been pitched up digitally because we have the first movie to go back to.
Yeah.
Like you said at the top of this, like they should have just filmed them together. I know why they didn't, but I also have this really strange idea that Stephen King movies are successful when they come out.
Yeah.
Like, it's a Stephen King movie. Is it going to be, are we going to make money? Like, yeah, I think so. It's a scary clown movie. I
really think they should have had enough confidence and say, shoot all the kids stuff, just shoot a shitload of kids stuff and use that for the flashbacks in the second one if you want it or whatever. They may have been thinking all along, well, we're not going to use the kids in the second one. And I feel like that was the idea, but you kind of can't because you're not going to do a whole movie. I mean, I understand what you're saying, have it just be them, but it's not going to do nearly as well because it's not the interesting part of the story. It
then
just
don't tell the fucking
isn't.
Second part of the story is my point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the second part of the story is not compelling anyway. So why are we keep going back to it?
Yeah.
You know, and look, I think a lot of it also stands on the shoulders, and we've talked about him before. Gary Dauberman, who I'm not a huge fan of his. He wrote The Nun. That movie is bad. It Chapter 2, It Chapter 1. He wrote Annabelle and Annabelle Creation and Annabelle Comes Home. Annabelle, I like those. Yeah,
I like all the Annabelles.
They're okay. They're better than The Nun and The Case of La Llorona. That's for sure.
Oh, fuck yeah.
So not hard to overcome that hill, but yeah. And, and that's the thing, I think that a lot of this does stand with Gary Dauberman because the script is a mess. It's a narrative mess. It's narratively disjointed. You have the scene where Ben falls into the Barrens and then all of a sudden it's like, they're kids now. Why?
Right.
What? No, just again, it's just, this movie is 2 hours and 40 minutes long. There is plenty of spots to cut things. You know what I mean? They know where the places were to make the cuts. They just decided like, well, you know what? In the age of Marvel movies being 2 hours and 50 minutes, people aren't going to complain that they're getting more movie. They want more movie. They want to sit there and have more Pennywise dancing around and Bill Skarsgård without the makeup on, whatever that scene was. I don't even know what that scene was supposed to be, where he just shows up as Bill Skarsgård, but Pennywise is an alien. So was that the person that he's imitating? That's not from the book. So that's like, and I know they've always wanted to, and now they're doing it to a Pennywise origin story because that's a thing that anybody asked for. No one did, but it feels like that was like them kind of like dipping their toe in the water of like, showing him and being like, my daddy was part of the circus. Like, but Pennywise is an alien.
Right.
I've never asked, why does Pennywise look like that? Was that based? I've never asked that. Like, but there must be someone out there who has, because that's what this next Pennywise stuff coming up feels like. Like, let's give us the origins of the character. Like, but
it's just one of the forms,
right,
that he's taken.
Right. So why does it matter? Like, is he going to be a clown in the new show? Because he doesn't have to be. Like,
I don't even know. They showed up.
They showed up as a bird in the Indians. The CGI thing. He's like a bird.
Yeah. No, it takes multiple forms, and the true form, and as it's explained in the book, we can't really see the true form, but the closest thing we have to it is a spider. That's why it's represented as a spider in the miniseries, and why it sort of takes that spidery form in this. We don't know its original form. That Pennywise is one of the main forms because it terrifies kids, or conversely, it appeals to kids, but then can terrify kids. I'm curious if there'll be a representation of it as a clown in that miniseries. I would think they've got enough to where they can avoid that, where it doesn't even have to be that character. It can be all these multitude of other things that it has been through the millennia.
Bill Skarsgård doesn't need to be involved with anything anymore. The Pennywise story is over.
Yeah, and I don't know that he is. I've seen very little about it other than I think it's an Amazon show.
Beep, beep, beep. Back that truck up to the house, baby. Brinks truck full of money.
You know what? It's funny because you just said beep, beep. And it's so constant. It's so constant in the book. And it's never explained in any of the adaptations. Like they say it a couple times in the original, they say it a couple times, but they never explain this is what we do to get Richie to shut up. And that has always annoyed me.
Oh, is that what that is? I thought that was like beep, beep, like the clown with the little horn.
That's what they would say to Richie to get him to stop, because he's ADHD and constantly talking. And so beep, beep, Richie is the cue to shut up. Huh. But they never explain it. And because
I always thought it was like a clown related thing. Kiss me, fat boy.
On that
Tim Curry's line delivery is always better than again, that's the thing. The lines that I remember from the movie, I don't remember Bill Skarsgård saying them. I remember Tim Curry saying them. Because again, Bill Skarsgård is he looks weird. That's the point. I appreciate and understand why people like his performance, but for me, it's a visually stunning performance. But outside of that, it's just look scary and run around, jump up and down. Like, all right. Is that scary to you? Must be. Not you, but writ large, a lot of people who saw the movie clearly were like, oh my God, this is so scary. It's all right, sure. And I hope that the new show stays away from the source material's worse, more uninteresting parts and hopefully leans into an original narrative. Wouldn't that be fucking something else? I would love to see an original narrative. Why not? Why not? Yeah. They do something like, you know what? People derided Hannibal before it came out. Look at that. Now I would say it is the definitive Hannibal character performance is Mads Mikkelsen. And I don't think anybody would have ever thought anybody could overshadow Anthony Hopkins and his performance. So maybe Pennywise in the show will be something that's so different and interesting and exciting that nobody gives a shit about the clown once the show's over.
Yeah, I think it'll be a different thing.
I hope so.
Even if it's represented, it might just be exploring the evil of the town.
That's what makes Pennywise an interesting character is by turning him into a clown and solely investigating the clown side of it, you're writing off all the stuff that is scary, that could be scary, where he is being scary to scare kids because he is like Freddy Krueger. He feeds on your fear, not the fear of children writ large. He's feeding on your fear, like the little girl with the birthmark. They don't accept you for the way you look. And like you said, that's the most successful scene in the entire series. I think it's as good as the Georgie scene in the first movie. And it's because, again, it plays on real fear, real things that are scary, and the idea that you don't look like everybody else and you're ostracized, and me too.
Right.
Obviously, clowns don't eat you in real life, but in the movie, the little girl, gets eaten by a clown. But I like that when they're actually like having something to say, as opposed to just like, let's go kill that fucking clown. Like, all right, whatever. Or ripping off The Thing, ripping it off completely. Not homage. Yeah. That's not an homage, guys. No. That's ripping it off.
Well, and then the ending is a Stand By, which you haven't seen, but the ending is a Stand By Me nod. And, there's all those little things in there.
Why they were referencing The Thing is beyond me. Stop making me think of better movies, please. I mean, they have the shot from behind lit the same way.
Well, and he says the exact same line. So
yeah. It's like,
and it's the same creature, basically.
A head with spider legs. Like, guys, come on, please. And it doesn't even look as good as the fucking prop in The Thing did. You a CGI mess.
Totally agree.
So, Mr. Begley, go ahead.
Say you cannot. No one will ever top The Thing.
Nope. So stop trying, or don't even try. Why are you trying? At least that kind of reference. Like, you can make other references, but don't do that because that's too iconic for you to get away with. Maybe your 12-year-old audience that didn't know what The Thing is like, oh, that's so scary. But like the adults in the audience are probably like, yeah, I've seen this before.
Yeah, that looks oddly familiar.
So what would be your what's your final take, Mr. Begley, on it, and it?
It's an interesting, very sloppy story to try to adapt, and I don't think there's been a successful adaptation of it yet. I was hopeful, though. I'll watch any of them again, probably with my daughter until she grows out of watching movies with me.
That's never going to happen, boss. Come on now. Don't be talking that way.
And it sounds like, she's up for definitely watching the miniseries again. So we'll be doing that, I'm sure. It's kind of nice to have that consistency with that, at least, as it's going to be, they shot it all at the same time and it's pretty faithful to the book, other than what they can't show because of the medium that they were using. But she seemed to really enjoy that one. So I don't know how often I'll watch the second one again, just because it's so damn long.
I don't need a 3-hour It movie. If it's going to be a 3-hour It movie, tell the entire story, but don't give me 5 hours of this story where 2.5 of the 5 hours is completely unnecessary and doesn't even serve the first movie you made. I'm aghast at filmmakers making a film, then making a sequel to their own film and just pulling down their pants and shitting all over their first film because we have to do something in the sequel to make you remember the first film, and we diminish the first film in the process. I don't like that. As a film goer, as a film viewer, I can understand where the director might be coming from, but like we've said, you should have done this all one go, or at least the kids stuff. Because again, these kids are 13 and 14. Like, go watch Stranger Things season 4. They're adults now. Why are they giving the kid who plays Will that haircut anymore? Beyond me. I have no idea why. But they're adults now. And and in It, you can see from It 1 to It 2, like they're become adults in the process. Sorry.
Hey man, that year between 11 and 12 and 12 and 13
is a lot.
They really they should have considered that. And like I said,
don't include the kids at all.
There's obviously some stuff that they shot that they didn't use and were able to use in this one, but most of it is new footage that's been manipulated, and it does negate the first one in a very weird way that I don't even know if there's a precedent for in other sequels.
If you go and listen to the end of the first episode I did on chapter 1, I essentially said, this movie will now be judged by how good the second movie is. If they stick the landing, everybody will be like, chapter 1 is great. Stick the landing.
Yeah.
It is unprecedented. It's weird that they did this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a weird phenomenon that, just really says a lot about how movies are made these days.
The Hollywood system got in the way of there being possibly 2 good movies, which should have just been one long movie or a mini series or a limited series or something. Not, we'll make one movie, maybe we'll make a second movie, but you got to make a second movie to tell the entire narrative, supposedly, or you could have just left it as It. The first movie's It, not just It, but also done. I don't think you need more than the first movie with this. Just call it It, not It Chapter 1, It. And just leave the second one in the dust. That
chapter 1 was obviously tacked on
after the fact.
Because it's not the title. If you look this movie up, it is not called It Chapter 1. It is a title card at the end of the film. And I remember back then when it came out and people, saying about their experience watching it, people in the audience going, Chapter 1?
Well, it's what is it? Red Letter Media. They were in the theater and some guy was like, they have to do the adults. Yeah. You have to do the adults. Like, great. Yeah. It's like, fuck exactly. You. Yeah. Look, I've never been someone who has been enthralled with the It story, and the book was just okay. So for me, I'm probably not the right audience here, but I went into it with an open mind because, again, that miniseries is bad but fun. And then the new movies are just, in my opinion, the first one's okay and the second one is just bad. It's just a muddled, muddy-headed, unnecessary, unsuccessful film, and a sequel to a movie that's way better than It is, for sure. The first one is better than the second without even pause. I wouldn't even think about it. Second one's bad. Second one's so bad I wouldn't even suggest anyone watch it. Like you can enjoy the narrative with just the first movie. And it ends the same way. The clown dies, as far as you know. If you never watch the second movie, what does it matter?
Yeah. No, that's true. And I think that's sort of where I'm leaning now. Like,
it's like the Dark Tower thing at the end of the Dark Tower, where it's like, don't read any further if you don't want this entire series to have it shit on for you. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. And for me, it's like, I mentioned this recently, and I can't remember who I was talking to, but I'll watch the first half of Full Metal Jacket because I liked the stuff in boot camp and not so much the Vietnam stuff. And I can just say in my head, that's where the movie ends.
Have you seen Dexter at all?
No.
I only watched the first 4 seasons of that show. There are 4 more seasons and I have no interest. That same thing. Like, I get to control what I get to control what I watch.
Yeah. So I would probably rewatch the first one.
It's a fun kids
and use that
movie.
Trick. Like, it's done.
Yeah. It's a fun kids in danger movie.
But I was excited for the second one and felt like I liked it more after I saw it immediately, but every time I've watched it since have liked it less. So I would, like I already said, I would watch any of them again with my kid. I get on Stephen King kicks and I just want to watch movies that are available. And if it's available, I would probably watch. Got to carve out a lot more time though. So it's a little bit harder with the second one, but yeah, I mean, watch them. It's a mess of a story. I think that's a given, but it has a lot to it that's really interesting. And
the source material is a mess. If the source material is a mess, how could the movies not be a mess?
Right. And they do a good job of cutting out the mess in the original. It's just hampered by other things. And, it's cut out the stuff that's a mess, maybe take some liberties and,
right.
We'll see. We'll see what the miniseries is like, or what the show is like. Not a miniseries, the show.
It, for me, is one of those books that's unfilmable. It's like Dune. It's one of those things where like I haven't seen a really good adaptation of it yet. Dune, I mean, I have seen a somewhat halfway decent adaptation of Dune. David Lynch is not the new one, but it's the same way. Like the original, it is halfway decent enough. That's it. Like that's clearly that's as good as it's going to get, because the new movies, they're not going to make a fucking remake of the new movies anytime soon. Hopefully not in my lifetime. I'm like, maybe if I'm 60 or 70 and they're remaking it, fine. But I hope we have new stories to tell by then, because that is the other thing here that I want to end this episode with. Stephen King has more stories. Go and fucking do those. Stop doing the same circuit of bullshit. Stop with The Shining and Pet Sematary and Salem's Lot and It. Like, fuck you. I'm done. Like, go adapt something else. Because he has
starter.
Yeah. Oh, that too. Yeah. Go adapt something else. He has plenty of things.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Like this is the one of the, if not the most prolific American horror author ever. And you are adapting the same shit over and over again. Why? Go adapt something else. Because you're telling me none of those other stories have any value. You can't take one of those short stories and pad it out and turn it into a full length narrative. Fucking Frank Darabont did with The Mist. And Frank Darabont is not known as the world's greatest director. He's just Frank Darabont. And look at him. He made my favorite Stephen King adaptation. And it was a fucking novella, essentially a short story.
He's made 3 great Stephen King adaptations, as far as I'm concerned.
That's fair.
And they're all shorts. They're all not novels.
Yeah.
None of them were.
They take an idea and they work with the idea into a full feature-length narrative.
Yeah.
Like, come on, guys. Like, I don't need another, like you said, Firestarter. We've gotten to the point now where that Stephen King has a ton of stuff. I know he does. So go and mine those things. Because, man, I would love to see someone. Frankly, I would love to see someone do a live action version of I forget what it is, but the baseball short story that Stephen King wrote. Like, go look at his other stuff.
The girl who loved Tom Seaver or something.
No, the one about the guy who I forget what it is, Blockade Billy or whatever, where it's like the guy who doesn't let anybody past him on first base. You know what I'm talking about? Mm-mm. It's a very weird Stephen King story. But again, it's like, he is such a prolific author. I mean, he wrote The Running Man. Come on, guys. Like, it's not 1-to-1 with the Arnold movie, but that's how far back we're talking with Stephen King.
Yeah. I don't know how many short stories. I have 5 or 6 collections of short stories.
His short stories are where it's at, man. Clearly, you get it.
Not very many of them have been adapted. A number from Night Shift, but there is a lot out there to do.
Stop doing the goddamn clown movies, please. Do a Stephen King anthology TV show where you adapt the short stories into episodes. Why hasn't anyone done that? They don't pay me shit to come up with these ideas, but someone please steal it from me, because tell me why that hasn't happened. You know what I mean? We're sitting at a time and place with the media consumption and the media output that there is no reason why Stephen King stuff shouldn't just be adapted more if that's what people want, but just stop adapting the same stuff, because those other things are probably dirt cheap to adapt. They're dollar babies. I bet a lot of them are. So, boy, we've come all the way around back to the beginning of it, huh? Back to Mr. Stephen King, where it all began. Mr. Begley, where can people find you talking about Stephen King things that aren't it?
They can find me at wakeupheavy.com, on social media, Netflix. Twitter. What's that place called? Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Wake Up Heavy. Stream the show wherever you listen to podcasts, and that's about it.
As for me, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, and I did do a series talking about the books and the adaptations, mainly from when I was a kid. So it kind of stops around it. So there's like 6 or 7 sort of short episodes, Stephen King through 1974 to 1979, 1980 to 83, et cetera, et cetera. So find those on wakeupheavy.com.
And as for me, cstachiw.com, cstachiw.com. That's my link tree. Go there for all the things I work on. Like Mark mentioned, I've been on his show several times, so you should go check his show out and check out the episodes I'm on if that's a thing you're into. And Mark's been on my show a fair amount, at least once a month. So check out those episodes, mainly horror movies, but we do talk about other things from time to time. Mark even programmed a month this year.
Ed Begley Jr.
Begley Jr. So that's where you can find all that.
Spring on you next year.
Ed Begley Jr. Part 2.
Or just Ed Begley.
Yeah, it's fair.
Senior.
And patreon.com/culturecast, culturecast.com. Rate and review the show on iTunes, please. That is the best spot to do it to help us out. Mark, thank you so much for joining me for yet another impromptu conversation about 3 movies. We tend to do that.
That's our shtick.
Yeah, it kind of is. So, so we watched it. I don't know if you should too, but make sure to check out the next episode.